enemy is advancing and we don't have enough firepower to defeat them. Hello?
Yes, sir.
We need heavy artillery support on the double.
Roger. Heavy artillery incoming.
That will show them.
Put simply, No Tanks Land is one of the hardest scenarios in the game. The extreme technological limitations of the World War I era, along with the harsh terrain and environment found here, make this scenario very challenging, especially for newer players. Today, I will be breaking down the details of No Tanks Land and show how you can build a vehicle to complete it. Let's get started. And here we have our starter hull named the SKL-124, weighing in at almost exactly 10 tons. This won't be very effective on the battlefield yet, so let's try and build a tank out of it that we can actually use. We'll immediately want to start by making it a bit longer, since this scenario essentially requires it, as you'll see later. Our next step is to work on adding armor and make sure the front is sloped enough that it can reliably bounce shots of up to 50mm of penetration. You'll notice in this scenario that while some of the vehicles are fairly lightly armored and don't have very good guns, you'll find that some of the heavier vehicles at the back end of the map will usually be a bit stronger. Take this vehicle as an example. It has a pretty strong front armor profile, as much as 40mm of effective frontal thickness. It also has a pretty reasonable gun with a pretty high fire rate of 30 rounds a minute. At 38mm of penetration, you pretty much have to make sure your vehicle is well above that from most frontal angles. So let's go to armor view, and we want these numbers to be quite a bit higher. Almost there. That should be way more than what we'll need. We'll keep it there for now. Let's bring the lower plate to 40. There we go. Let's maybe slope this back just a bit more. We can adjust the tracks later. Our side armor should be 20mm, since that should be plenty to deflect shots from the front. Although our side will be a bit vulnerable, that shouldn't be a problem in this scenario. We'll also want to set our rear to, well, 10mm of armor should work just fine. We'll also be good with 10mm on the top, because that should bounce just enough. Now let's repeat the process with the turret. We don't need a very big turret. If anything, we could just use a basic cylinder. Like that. This should fit the vibe of the era pretty well. We should probably add about 50mm of frontal armor and gradually decrease it the closer we get to the sides. That does it for armor. Now let's take a look at the tracks and see what we can do to cut the weight down. Our tracks here are taking up an impressive 30% of our vehicle's weight. We should probably try to trim this down a bit since we don't need heavy duty tracks for a World War I tank that weighs hopefully about 10 tons once we're all done. As you can see here, we have really big road wheels that are in sets of 2. Since we're probably going to use a track like this, we don't need them to be that big. We can't really decrease the track thickness, but what we can do is make the road wheels a bit thinner. Let's bump up, nope, not that spacing, that spacing. Let's make them a bit thinner, cut down their diameter a bit. Now let's go here and cut down on the suspension scale. We've already trimmed out quite a bit of weight, but we can probably go a bit further. These torsion bars simply don't need to be that thick. Anything, that is about all we will really need for this. We don't need this many return road wheels either. So let's try and bump up the spacing. There we go. We could probably make the road wheels just a bit bigger too. Oh, apparently making them bigger actually cuts down the weight a bit. And we have more ground clearance, which will be very useful in this era. Our tracks look good, and we've trimmed out quite a bit of weight. With that done, now let's take a look at the engine and see what we can do to make it run a bit better. As you can see here, I've turned up the displacement from the initial value since we're going to need the biggest engine we can get, but here it doesn't look like these settings are configured correctly. Our upshift is where it should be, which is as high as possible, but our downshift is right next to it. We want to bring this down to about 400 and then bring the idle RPM with it. And our transmissions are also fairly easy, because there's not much to really configure here. What we can do is go back to our tracks and take a look at the sprocket wheel and take the diameter to about as small as we can get it. With that done, our transmission now allows us to take our sizes and go a bit lower, which will in turn help save weight. For this, we can use a first gear of 2, second gear of 0.9, and a final gear of 0.5. This gives us 12.4 kilometers an hour, which in fact we can actually take that down a bit more. Should probably adjust the subsequent gears after. And that should be our front drive. For our reverse drive, we'll want to go to about 4 for the reverse gear. Having a taller reverse gear will make it a bit easier to back out of any ditches that this would get stuck in, while keeping our forward gears a bit lower allows us to maintain fairly good speed going forward. In terms of vehicle fuel, we really don't need a lot on this. We can take down the default 600 and put it to just 120, since all we're doing is really crossing a trench, and a few more trenches, and a few more trenches after that. In terms of crew, you can use 4 if you want, but for this I'm only going to use 3. We'll have a commander and gunner in one. We'll have a dedicated driver and a radio. No, we'll have a dedicated loader for the third crew member. We can take our driver's space and cut it down. But let's keep our loader, commander, and gunner about as high as we can keep them. Now let's start slapping guns on here. We only need one in this case. 75mm caliber is a little much for this era when most vehicles only have up to 40, maybe 50mm of armor. As a result, we can bring this down all the way to 37mm. You can make the gun a bit longer to compensate. No, about there should be just fine. Let's take that down to increase the reload a bit more. 63mm a pen is more than plenty for this era. We could probably even make it a bit bigger actually and load APHE instead of AP rounds, which should be a bit more effective in this era. Yeah, that'll work. In terms of rack placement, it might be tricky. And we don't need a lot of ammo either. 104 rounds is a bit much. Actually, let's put 2 of them and just shrink it down to about 24 per rack should work fine. Make sure the crew has space to operate. We'll need to bring the turret back a bit more to fit it in. That way our crew still has space to operate the vehicle. Now let's add a commander cupola to the top so that our guy can actually see what he's doing. Let's include a gunner's viewport. Stick it off to the side just a bit. And let's make sure our ammo is actually APHE instead of AP. And while we're looking at the crew, let's give our guy a viewport so he can see where he's driving. With that said and done, we actually have a lot of leftover space. That means we can take the vehicle and shrink it down a bit. We can make it a bit less wide, bring these in just a bit, maybe pull the top up a bit. Should probably bring out the sides as well. This guy is now very, very long. If anything, we could probably take the tracks and bring them in just a little bit too. And with that out of the way, let's start decorating. And with a few more tweaks, this vehicle is all done. As you can see here, we have a pretty long vehicle chassis, our nice little good luck charm, and plenty of accessories to help the crew. I had to make a few changes to the crew. Instead of having a gunner and commander, there's now a loader and commander, since apparently the gunner will function better if he's by himself. But that is pretty much everything. This vehicle is all ready to go. Let's go beat the scenario. We're off to a good start already. This vehicle has some pretty good acceleration, even for a World War I vehicle. And a top speed of, so far, 14 kilometers an hour is really good for a vehicle of this era. I doubt we'll have to use the reverse gears much. It's also probably a good thing to have them for all the allies that tend to get stuck every now and then. Looks like there's an AT gun over here. Another advantage of the 37mm is it has very high muzzle velocity, meaning it's a bit easier to aim. Before we move forward, we should park a few allied vehicles back here by holding I to shut off their engines, because they simply won't turn them back on after. From here, these vehicles are pretty safe from the enemies and have a very good sniping position to deal with them as they start to spawn later on. Looks like an ally already took care of an AT gun. So far, 3 of them have successfully crossed, including ours. Let's see if we can make it across. Nope, we can't. And this is where the reverse gear does prove useful. This guy's about to get himself stuck, so let's put this vehicle in a proper orientation and then get him unstuck. AT gun down. And our only loss so far has been 1 to artillery. They took care of the enemy positions very efficiently though. And we made it across. Fun fact for anyone who hasn't looked before, artillery shells in the game have fully modeled textures. You can see here it is a QF-135. Where this came from exactly, it's not very clear. Looks like we can't cross here, so let's back out and try to use the bridges. You have to be a bit careful when using these because they will break under a certain amount of force. That crossing was fairly smooth though. I don't think we will need it for this next one. Nope, is that an AT gun over there? It is. Not anymore. And there are the remaining 5 enemy tanks. We have a nice... The Allies took care of that one. And there appears to be one more over here. Well, there was. There is one left and I'm not even sure where he is. It looks like that might be him over there. Well, there go all of the enemy tanks. Now all that's left is the artillery. And we have made it. Furthermore, we've made it without much trouble at all. One artillery down. There is one more over here. Let's get him before moving on. We did it! Check out all this fuel we didn't end up using, or this ammo. Maybe we over-prepared by just a bit? Nonetheless, I think this vehicle handled it very, very well. Now let's see how well our allies fared over here. And back over here. Looks like this guy apparently was stuck in the ditch here. And some of them simply didn't move beyond the initial starting point. This guy didn't even get anywhere close. Looks like he just turned in the ditch and stayed there. These two guys were simply parked here. As you can see by the barrel marks, they've got a combined total of 4 kills. Not sure what this guy's doing though. But one large advantage is we only lost a single vehicle to artillery. Maybe our good luck charm was useful after all. With that said and done, I am happy to say this vehicle has performed extremely well on the battlefield. I hope the techniques and methods that I showed here will help you to improve your own vehicles. Thanks for watching and see you all soon!